demonstration. To an artist, is poetry or a painting. It's something that enlightens you in a moment and tells you something new that you didn't know before. That's what we look for. That's what we look for. We don't look for the, oops, sorry. That's what we look for. We don't look for lame. We look for hack. However, there's something different than the time that Neuro and I spent on the IRC together chatting. He wasn't much on the IRC. He was already more adult than us because he's so old, as somebody pointed out this morning. But we are not there anymore. We are actually on the top of the front page news. So our findings impact the public perception. Let me give you an example. Now, let me be clear before I start talking about this research that I am not commenting the research. I am commenting the impact of the research. I purposefully chose research that is actually good, but had an interesting and misleading impact. So now the first piece of research is this presentation by Andrei Kostin, Ghosts in Air Traffic. Andrei and his co-authors picked up ADS-B, which is a protocol used in aviation, and I will gently tread here because one of the biggest experts on aviation security in the world is sitting here in front of me, Andrea Barisani, so I'm trying not to say anything wrong. He discussed ADS-B security, and he found out that there were some vulnerabilities, which actually were not really vulnerabilities. They were design choices. ADS-B is open by design. There are some advantages to its design that outweigh its security concerns. And also, it is designed and used thinking of this. So it's not used, for instance, in some critical loops where those design, shall we say, issues could potentially lead to damaging results. So the research was okay, maybe the context was missing, and the result on the media was this. Next generation air traffic control vulnerable to hackers spoofing planes out of thin air. Now, hackers cannot spoof planes. That's pretty much a given. I will very much trust that we cannot spoof planes. And the point is that without context, this research sounds more dangerous than it actually is. There's another piece of research that is similarly doomed. Ugo Teso made this presentation about aircraft hacking, where the core of the presentation was that Hugo bought FMS, a flight management system, which is a critical piece of the avionics on board an aircraft, which also controls the autopilot. And he showed that there was a way to exploit it, which is not terribly surprising. Most embedded devices do not have strong security protections. Now, he showed that, and then he showed with a simulator how that could theoretically do damage to the aircraft. And he also showed at the beginning how to use ADS-B to figure out which plane you wanted to target and what were the parameters of that plane. Now, on the media, this turned into hacker uses an Android to remotely attack and hijack an airplane. Where the Android, if you are curious, was the fact that he used an app on his phone to follow ADS-B traffic, like Flight Radar 24 for those that use it. So this actually caused the FAA to have to issue statements saying, no, look, this is not real. This is not going to happen. And actually, this entire fact, which also ended up on Repubblica, but that's not so surprising, probably. This entire fact If you go and look at the discussions online related to the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines 370, there's a lot of people that claim that it was actually hijacked and pointed this research as a proof that that can happen, that it can be hijacked by a remote. So I don't precisely know what happened to MH370, and we probably will never really know with absolute precision, but we do know it's not this. But the list goes on and on. So this is Cy Dragan, Chris Roberts, a researcher in the US, that tweeted that from a flight. Find myself on a 737-800. Let's see, box, IFE, in-flight entertainment, SATCOM. Shall we start playing with messages, pass oxygen on anyone? And he was actually picked up by the FBI after the flight landed. Now, while I can reasonably see why the FBI would be worried, and I would be worried as well, the fact is that this guy never did anything because he couldn't. There's no way he could. And every single researcher with some knowledge of avionics will tell you that. So in spite of everything else, all of this appears to end up to the conclusion that there's no way Roberts could have hacked the thrust controls of a plane. This appeared in Wired like weeks after the fact. The guy was interviewed by Codice on Rai Uno last year, I think, and spun the same tale, which has been debunked like 4 years ago. So the point is that sometimes these things end up in the media because of chance. Sometimes some researchers are, shall we say, slightly less cautious than they should be in communicating. And sometimes it's really apparent from the start that something is flawed. So this summer, Ruben Santamarta, a colleague from IOActive, basically showed security vulnerabilities in a piece of code that he says comes from Boeing 787 onboard software. He basically found that online with disputable ways and then hacked into it. But the important part of the entire article on this is the part in bold down there. Santamarta himself admits that he doesn't have a full enough picture of the aircraft or access to a $250 million jet to confirm his claims. In short, it's bullshit. It's a short translation of that. It's not. It's a valid exploit in a software. But you cannot say what that will do to a plane if you don't have the plane or a good enough picture of the plane in order to tell. Well, if you don't, you don't. There's a reason why there's not so many people here doing research on aviation security. It's because you need the frigging plane. In my group, we do research on robots because we have robots. We do research on cars because we have bought a car and we hack into it. But we don't do research on aircraft because I would have a difficult time convincing my rector to allow me to park an A380 behind the university. Why do I focus on cyber-physical systems? Why is this different from everything that has happened before? Because this has happened before, and it will happen again. Well, there's a few reasons. The first reason is that people see and perceive physical things, and they can immediately perceive them as relevant. More relevant than other things. We are computer geeks. We think data, computers, and applications are relevant because that's what we do. But to people, hacking into a bank system is never going to be as imaginatively bad as hacking into an airplane. Because computer systems in banks don't scream while they fall. And it's right that people find these more disconcerting. People find it disconcerting. Politicians realize that the systems that maintain our societies are actually critical. And this has not happened now. Vivian Redding was the vice president not of the current commission, not of the previous commission, but of the commission before that. 10 years ago, this was already on the agenda of states for protecting the citizens. Cyber-physical systems are often safety critical and may involve danger to human life. For instance, take robots. This is what robots look like today, mostly. They are confined in a cage. If you open up this cage, which is called the protected space, the robot stops. And it doesn't stop because the computer tells it to stop. It stops because opening the cage opens a relay and power is cut to the motors and brakes start to work. You can hack into those robots as much as you want, but as soon as somebody opens up the protected space, those robots are going to stop. Now, this robot instead, which is called Yumi, is perfectly safe to work with. It's gentle. It's never going to hurt a human. It has been designed so. But since there's no physical protection, all of these safety constraints are in software. So securing the software for these robots is less critical from a safety point of view than securing the software for these robots. And this is the future of robotics, not this. Systems that are cyber-physical are automated. Getting into a car without a steering wheel and brakes, that's a concept, by the way. It's not a real car yet. But getting into there is going to require us a leap of faith, which is the same source as the fear that many people have when they board an airplane. It's not fear of height or fear of flying. It's the fear of loss of control. On a car, you have the perception that if something bad happens, you can somehow intervene and try to save yourself. Grab the steering wheel. Grab the handbrake if the car still has one, which is a difficult proposition nowadays. If you're on a ship, you think that you can at least try to jump into the sea and swim. But if you are on a plane, you can't do anything. That's the root of the fear of many people. Now, this is fear of automation. And automation has always evoked fear. Those are pictures that some people in the room will recognize and some people in the room won't because of age. Again, yes, of course. It's all about age. But this is from War Games. So since it's a film from 1984, if I recall correctly, and it might not spoiling the last season of Game of Thrones, I think I can safely talk about it. But if you have not seen it, you should. And for many people of my generation, that's the first time we saw a hacker on screen hacking into a system. And it clicked, right? It clicked. I'm looking at you because you're the only one that can have clicked with that. Or maybe Yvette, sorry. So it clicked with us. It was the first role model for the hacker on screen. But you know what? That was not the point of the film. The point of War Games is fear of automation, fear of what happens when you transfer control of nuclear weapons to this device here, which is a 1984 idea of what an artificial intelligence looks like. And upon reflection, maybe the artificial intelligence was actually better than the current controller of US nuclear weapons, but that would lead this keynote in a different direction, so let's leave it as a side thought. Now, fear of automation is deeply inset in us, and the only way to get around it is to create trust in people. Now, people expect computers not to work. So they will expect our beautiful self-driving cars not to work. That's not a great start for the self-driving car industry. So we cannot keep the circus going, because showing that we can hack into a Jeep and drive off the road at journalists from remote is only going to help to a point. It's going to drive a point home. Stunt hacks are important because they raise awareness. They make people look and say, ooh, that can happen? Whoa. But then comes the question, the big question, what do I do to avoid that from happening? And we cannot keep spinning the balls around and passing on to the next system and saying, hey, you know that this happens also to this other system, and look, it happens also over there, and over there behind you, a monkey with 3 heads. We cannot do that. We cannot do that. And stunt hacks focus on specific vulnerabilities. That's their shortcoming. So there's vulnerabilities in everything. That's pretty much a given. But the point is, so we cannot really prove any point by proving that there's a vulnerability, or 100. The point is, if vulnerabilities are dense, so if there's many vulnerabilities, if they are sparse, you point at vulnerability, patch vulnerability, squash bug, problem solved. If they are dense, and they are being put into code faster than we can take them out of code, finding vulnerabilities is completely pointless. Of course, if you find one, you raise the problem, you get the problem solved. Of course, if you find an entire class of problems, as Daniel and other colleagues around the world did for processors, that's great because you actually engage a process for eliminating a class of vulnerabilities. But a single vulnerability is not really important. This part is from a keynote by Dan Geer. Dan Geer is one of the greatest minds of cybersecurity. If you have 1 hour of your life to spend well, find his keynote at Black Hat USA 2014 and look it entirely. For the next 19 minutes, you are stuck with me. I'm sorry, that's not just as good. But so we are not going to solve anything by squashing vulnerabilities one at a time. And this is not a new lesson. This is an old lesson. This is a message from years ago from Buzz Albert, that is a great kernel hacker and exploiter. And he's basically saying the same thing. Bugs don't matter. Vulnerability research is bullshit. The way to approach this is not trying to get the bugs out of the kernel. It's trying to make sure that whenever there is a bug in the kernel, it doesn't lead to complete compromise of the system so easily. You need to design systems around basically stopping the routes of impact of the vulnerabilities, not the routes to the vulnerabilities, because the routes to the vulnerabilities cannot be stopped completely. And this is a lesson that we have already learned, and we should avoid to learn it again by having planes and cars crash. We should avoid to have to learn it again. Now, vulnerability research, in order to be useful for this, needs systemic context. It needs to understand what are the impacts, what are the results of the attacks. Do you remember this? That's precisely what's in there. It's pointless to say that there is a vulnerability in a piece of software on the plane if you don't know what this will do to the plane, or if it will do anything at all to the plane. Because, and I realize that I'm talking to computer engineers here, and you are unsympathetic to me for what I'm going to say, but I'm a computer engineer myself, and I'm going to say it. Computers do not matter in cyber-physical systems. Systems matter. If the computer can be compromised, who cares if the system is not affected by that? Who cares? So, in order to fix this, I don't have the recipe, because otherwise I would be out there doing it and making a lot of money from it. Instead, I'm here stuck, keeping you on the chairs and being a professor. But I have a couple of suggestions for other people to do, as it's a typical professor style. One of them comes from our own research, so I can bash myself without fear of retribution. Done with Fede from Trend Micro, and with my wonderful students and ex-students, Davide, Marcello, Mario, and with my colleague, Andrea Zanchettin. This is a research on robots. And you may have seen it or may have not. There's a recording of it. You can go and see it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But we presented it at Black Hat in the circus. Federico and Marcello and Davide put on their red noses and started performing in front of the circus. And this is what the circus cheered for. We found that inside the robot, basically the robot does not check signatures on updates. My cell phone does. And these half a ton, 70,000 euros worth of machinery does not. So whatever you load, it loads and executes. It does use unsecure protocols so you can affect this upload system. And the circus cheered, right? Woohoo! There's a hidden path where if you place an aptly named file, you can reconfigure the operating system underlying the robot. Woohoo! There's this in the code, triple cheer from the audience. Because this is I don't know how technical the folks here are, I suppose pretty much. So I'm not going to dive into an explanation, but this is basically on the slides of your Secure Programming 101 What Not to Do classes. It's a straight buffer overflow from the 90s. And since it is on a system that does not have any memory protections, any randomization, any non-executable stack, you can exploit it pretty much as in smashing the stack for fun and profit. It works. So, triple cheer from the audience for the cybersecurity circus. This doesn't matter. None of this matters, because this small block here says that ABB, that is the vendor of the robot, has patched it. So it doesn't matter anymore. Who cares? This is what mattered. That the impact of this on the press was catastrophe warning. Watch an industrial robot get hacked. Watch hackers, that was us, sabotage an industrial robot arm. And finally, my top favorite of the bunch, hackers are remotely controlling industrial robots now. Oh my God, what's going to happen? This is going to happen. That's what the people draw from this. And it's not the message. The freaking message was in the next section of the paper that was evidently too academic for anybody to read, which was looking at the post-exploitation strategies, because you are never going to fix that code base in a lifetime. But you can make it so that when somebody breaks into that code base, something that is going to happen because it's going to be broken for years and years to come, they at very least cannot kill anybody. And we can do that by reducing the attack surface after the exploitation, changing the architectures, improving resilience, for instance, checking the done firmware signatures. These kind of things can be done, and they can reduce the impact that an attacker can have. So this is the first suggestion. We need to focus on impact, resilience strategies, architectural changes. And second, we need to embed the security into the design process. And we need to use a risk-driven method. Let me use automotive for an example. I didn't think how embarrassing it would be to do this keynote in front of Andrea right here, because he's kind of the topmost expert on what I'm talking about. So there's been multiple hacks and attacks on cars for years. There's been Charlie and Chris, but there's been a bunch of others. And you know what? These attacks are all the same attack. You find an exploit on the attack surface of the outside of the vehicle, typically the infotainment system, remote firmware update, or e-call box. This is connected to the CAN network. Once you are inside the vehicle, it's your vehicle. This is the security assumption of vehicles. And so it's done. When you can do that, you have taken the vehicle. You can drive it away. You can influence its operations. You can modify it permanently, extract personal information. You can do anything because the vehicle is made of hundreds of computers that trust each other. So once you have broken into one, you've broken into all of them, basically. So all of these attacks are the same attack. Now, if we focus on the vulnerability is the first step of this attack. And there's always going to be vulnerabilities, in particular in systems that were not designed to be exposed to the internet. However, the defense circus is sometimes better than the exploitation circus, because if you focus on the vulnerability, as for instance FCA did, but because they had no other way to do it, like snail mail, and instructed them to put it into the vehicle and let the vehicle, everyone go to the dealers for maintenance, and people to actually slam any USB key that comes into the mail inside their vehicle. Now, the point is securing the vehicle. No. Does this change our way to design vehicles? No. Trusted network. This is going to happen over and over again. We can park a vehicle here in front. Don't do it on any vehicle that is not yours, but you can park a vehicle here in front and hack together on it. So the typical suggestion of most researchers is, yeah, all we need to do is get rid of CAN. At which point, automotive, but for other reasons and in geological times. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Then there's academic researchers that instead tries to come up with magic intrusion detection systems using machine learning. I was a bit ahead of time, probably. They didn't work. I can tell you safely now, I'm a professor, nobody cares about my PhD physics anymore. They didn't work. They didn't work back then, they don't work now, and they will not work in the future. I can tell you, I designed them. They didn't work. And surely they will never work enough for an automotive manufacturer to place. So if your intrusion detection system cannot stop the attacks because nobody in their sane mind will allow it to stop a command to your brakes, what can they do? Do they make a light blink on your dashboard with a guy in a balaclava hacking on a keyboard? And what do you do when the hacker icon lights up on the dashboard? Do you drive to the side of the road and call the police? What are you exactly supposed to do with this information? It's pointless. Or you can suggest that we go ahead and penetration test our way out of thousands of combinations of first security problem. We need to approach this problem by performing safety-driven difficult for most cyber-physical systems. Like, pick up a car. There's only 4 bad things that you may want to do towards people off board. Get the PII that is on board. Get the intellectual property that is on board. There's nothing else that you can want to do to a vehicle. All those computers, all those interfaces, they all lead up to these 4 things. So the attack tree, the threat assessment for these 4 things is not difficult. If you want to steal a vehicle, you have 3 or 4 ways to do it. And these 3 or 4 ways map specifically to certain ECUs and to certain commands. You can design your vehicle thinking of these attack trees and create topologies that are more resilient to this. If you can avoid the attacker achieving those 4 goals, the attacker can hack into whatever they want. And we do not care. Of course, it's an extreme, right? We still do care. We still want to protect those. But if we at least can avoid the attacker achieving those objectives, we can actually design safe vehicles to drive. We can actually design safe planes to fly, as it has already been done. We need to look at the industries where this has already been done. Avionics is a good example. Of course, the problem with those approaches is that they take time. They incur costs. But this cost is what we need to pay if we want to have systems that are trustworthy enough for people to jump into a car without a steering wheel and actually reach safely their destination. So in conclusion, I think we focus way too much on attack research. And I'm an attack researcher, for Christ's sakes. If I tell you that we focus too much on what I do for a living, probably you may need to listen to me. I'm not doing Cicero pro domo sua here. I'm doing Cicero against his home. Vulnerabilities, in the grand scheme of things, do not matter. They have absolutely no meaning. And stunt hacking is useful to a point. When we go beyond that point, stunt hacking is just dangerous and reckless. It's showing off. And circus artists who show off too much tend to end up badly. So this cybersecurity circus needs to stop at some point. And I think we are way past that some point. We need to focus on architectural changes on reducing the impact of vulnerabilities. That's what we need to focus on. It's not going to happen as long as we keep rewarding and keep publicizing only attack research. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm here to take them. You can ask them in Italian if you're shy. Okay. I guess that I was either too boring or too explicative, so either very good or very bad. Thank you very much for your attention.